last Sunday actually, we've been looking at who God is. And as a beginning of this year, I think it's important to find out who is God. And last Sunday we spoke about this picture that we have of God. Is God this mean God who is angry kind of God? And we discovered that he is not. And this morning we're going to be looking at a question that I think many people wrestle with. I know I wrestle it sometimes. And particularly we tend to wrestle with this in ways that we often don't want to talk about it when it comes to church. And it's the question, is God cold-hearted? Is God a cold-hearted God? Is God a distant God? In other ways, you can think about it in a very simple ways. Does God care? Does he really care? Does he care about what's going on in your life? Is he involved in what's going on in your life? Or did he, millions of years ago, just sort of kick-started the universe and then he left us to sort out things and fend for ourselves? Because that's what a lot of people tend to think. I don't know if you remember many years ago, there was a song by, what's his name, Bette Midler. God is from a distance, loving us. And it was a very famous song. And the question is God watching us from a distance? Or is God close by, literally closer than we think? You know, it's interesting. More and more people kind of have this perception of God today that he just sort of, as I said, kick-started the universe and he's just not really available. He's not really listening. He can't actually do anything. Does he really care? I mean, last year and the year before there were 2 movies that came out. God is Not Dead 1 and 2, and this talk about there is God really here? I feel more and more people are wrestling with this question, and not just for an academic reason per se, but because of a personal experience. Like when a prayer went unanswered, or when suffering or injustice goes on and overlooked time after time, and when something happens that seems to be so tragic, so awful, and you think to yourself, God, why did you not do anything? You could have done something to stop that. Some time ago, a friend of mine, he was in his 20s then, was diagnosed with this illness where your immune system actually attacks the joints of your body. It's incredibly painful and debilitating. He went from being an avid cyclist, a sports guy, soccer player. He used to hold a record in water skiing, to unable to walk. Sometimes unable to even get out of bed. He experienced pain like he had never felt before. And while there is a treatment, the doctor said there was no cure. He told me people would stop by and say things like, you know, God is with you. We are praying for you. And God is able. And he told me for the first time, he thought, well, what if God isn't? What if God isn't really listening to me? What if God isn't able? What if God really doesn't care? And those were the questions that many of us ask ourselves, especially when a tragedy happens in our life. You know, these questions just can linger in a room. It's a question that's been asked really throughout human history. One of Israel's most beloved King David, wrestled with this question. He wrote the words in Psalm 13. He says, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? He says, how long? You see, David has been praying and praying, hoping and waiting for God to show up. And he wasn't sure. Even King David wasn't sure. Even King David had doubt about God. You see, even the writers of scriptures wrestle with this question. Does God even care? The main question in our day may not be, is God good? We know God is good. But it may be simply, what good is he? And that's the questions people ask. Maybe you've been in a place like that. Maybe you once felt God was so close to you, but you're not sure anymore. Maybe you've been praying not just for days or for weeks or for months, but maybe you've been praying for years, and it just doesn't seem like God is going to answer that question. Maybe you've been pouring out your life into a person or to a need in your community, but the problem doesn't seem to get better. It just seems to get worse and worse and worse. Maybe you're facing a pain or a loss. Or you've been battling with addiction or a habit. You've been going to church and you've been praying. You've been doing the right thing, but where is God? Have you ever asked yourself that question? I mean, be honest with yourself. Be honest with God. Have you ever asked yourself that question? Someone once described it to me in this way, and I will never forget these words. He said, I can't prove God doesn't exist, but my life can prove He doesn't care. Ouch. Well, there's a story in the Bible about these three siblings, Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. Many of you have heard those names, and something happened in this family that challenged every ounce of their faith. It shakes the foundation of their faith. It leaves them wondering, God, where are you? Where were you? Why would you let this happen? And so for the rest of the time together, I just want us to walk through this story. Okay, chapter 11, verse 1 to 43. And see if this story has anything to say to your story, to my story. And it's from the Gospel of John, chapter 11, and we'll start in verse 1, and you can follow along and read. And this is what John writes. These are the words that he says. He says, Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. In brackets it says, this Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. Now let's stop there for a second. This story begins as many other stories in the Gospels, with someone asking Jesus for help. And it happens all the time, but this story is actually different. It's quite unique. This is not a stranger's request. It's not from a stranger on the street, on a random person in the crowd. Jesus knows this family. In fact, Jesus knows this family really, really well. Now, the town of Bethany is just a few miles east of Jerusalem. When Jesus would have traveled from Galilee to Jerusalem, he often would stay with his family. In fact, that's why John tells us that it's the same Mary as the one who poured the perfume on Jesus' feet. By the way, the story hasn't happened yet in John's Gospel. Okay, so John hasn't actually written that story yet. John is telling us it's the same family you're going to hear about who Jesus knows, who he spends time with, who he shares meal with, who has laughed with and cried with. In other words, it's a close family. In fact, Jesus is such close friends with Lazarus that if you notice, Mary and Martha didn't even mention his name when they wrote it down. It says, the one you love is sick. The phrase can also be translated as your dear friend or your best friend is sick. Notice that they don't even have to ask for help. Did you notice that? It just says your dear friend is sick. The one you love is sick. You just kind of tell him what's happening. It's as if they had this agreement, this understanding. Jesus, we know you, you know us, we're close, we spend so much time together, we know what you can do. If anything were to happen to us, well, we know that you're going to show up. We know you'd be there, and we know that you cared, because this is what best friends do, care. You see, when you love someone, when you care about someone and they are in need, you don't stop and check your email before going to them. You don't see what else is on Netflix. What do? You drop everything, don't you? And you show up. I'll be there in 10 minutes or in 5 minutes. I'll be there just now, you will tell them. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. What's surprising is what we read next as John writes. And look at it as we continue reading. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, what does it say? He stayed where he was 2 more days. 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea. I think we can go. Now let's try and pause here and let's get this straight. Jesus here of this family emergency, and he says to us, I love this family. This is a close family. This is a special family. This is a unique family. And he basically does nothing about it. He stays where he is for 2 more days. He's not busy with anything else. And John doesn't tell us that he's in a meeting or he's giving a sermon somewhere else or someone else needs his healing help. In fact, Jesus doesn't just wait. He waits until he knows Lazarus already died. I'm not making this up. Look in this scripture. You guys are looking at me. Don't look at me. Look at the scriptures. John writes this. He says, so then he told them plainly, Lazarus is, so he knows he is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. Again, let's pause here and say, what is this about? Believe in what? That you don't care about your friend? Is that what we need to believe? Is that why we stayed behind? That you had better things to do? That you were preoccupied, Jesus, and that's why we didn't go and you heard about it? That you'd rather be somewhere else by yourself or be over there praying or thinking about something that you want to teach us later? What do we need to believe, Jesus? You know, it's interesting that the name Lazarus in Hebrew means God has helped. God has helped. But at this point in the story, it looks like just the opposite, doesn't it? God hasn't helped, doesn't it? God didn't help. Maybe God couldn't help. 2 days, so much for our faith hinging on a space between the request for God to help and a space between God showing up. So I don't know. Maybe they're saying, does he know? Is he going to show up? That 2 days, that space when God could have stepped in to help your marriage. That space when God could have stepped in to heal the loved one. That space when it was before it got even worse. It was just bad before it got worse and God could have done something. That space between where was God? Why those 2 days? It's really the question that we wrestle with. Whether we like it or not, the first thing we need to see in the story is Jesus does this for a reason. It's not an accident. He's not forgetful. He does this for a reason, and he does this on purpose. There is something Jesus wants us to believe about him. There is something Jesus wants to see for us to see in him that is more important than anything else that's going on in our lives. It's more important than any other request, any other prayer, and any other thing we need to think might be the main thing for us. God, if you just do this. Hey? How many of us have prayed that prayer? God, if you just do this. I know. Maybe I've been over dramatic in the past few days. But I said to Tammy, why is God doing this? Just at the end of last year, we said this is going to be a healthy year for the Berkovich. God, if you just do this, Jesus is saying there is something else that is even more important than that. Jesus finally goes to Bethany, and when he arrives, he has three conversations, and we're going to walk through each one of them. The first is with Martha. Martha, as many of you know from the stories in Scripture, is more of a kind of an outgoing personality, an extrovert, a type A, intense, kind of highly strung member of the family. Okay, so have you got that in the picture of your mind? So it's not surprising when she hears Jesus has arrived, she's the first one to go out and meet him. Okay? And this is what she says. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if he had been here, my brother would not have died. I mean, I just love that honesty, isn't it? Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. God, if you had just been here, God, if you had just done something, in other words, you could have prevented this, God. You could have done something about this. Sometimes the only faith we can muster is simply to be honest with God. To be honest with God. Sometimes faith is just raw honesty. I've heard people say, well, I don't quite know how to have faith. Well, do you know how to yell? Do you know how to be honest? Do you know how to get angry? Do you know how to express your feelings? That is being honest with God. And I wonder what that phrase would be like for you in your life. God, if you have just been here, my career would have been in a better shape. God, if you have just been here, my kids would not be struggling. God, if you have just been here, my marriage would not have failed. God, if you have just been here, my heart wouldn't have been broken. I wonder what the words would be for you, like many of us. Martha's faith has been shaken. She is looking for an answer, and you see her looking for some kind of an answer from Jesus, and she grabs hold of Jesus, and Jesus meets her there, and he says, your brother will rise again. Martha kind of probably shifts back into this kind of a theology mode, and she says to him, I know, okay, I understand. I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. I remember you spoke to us about it in one of the mountain tops in Israel. In other words, I know there will be a day when God will do what God says he will do. I know the promise. I'm a faithful first century Christian Jewish woman. I understand where God is going to do in this world. I theologically understand that, Jesus. And Jesus says to him, no. He comes up, interrupts and says, no, your theology is right. But it's missing something really important. He says these words no other first century rabbi would dare to say. And he says, I am the resurrection and the life. And the one who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives by believing in me would never die. In other words, there is a kind of a life and death that death cannot touch. There's a kind of a life that is available to you and to me through him. In other words, Martha, you don't understand. You see, the reason why Jesus wasn't in a rush, the reason why it was fine to arrive just when he did, is he wanted us to see the truth of who Jesus is. He wanted us to know the truth about who he is. And he uses this phrase, I am. Now, most of us will look at it and read and it says, I am. Okay, well, Jesus is talking about himself. So like I will say, I am a minister, using the word I am. But the first century hearers, the people in the crowd who heard Jesus say that to Mary, didn't have a misunderstanding of what the I am meant. You see, the I am is the very reference of who God is. The word Yahweh, or as most of us know, is Jehovah. That was a name that was so sacred, that was so holy, that if you had to write it down, you would take your pen, you will put it down, you will take another pen and you will write the name Yahweh. And then put it down and pick up that pen again. I don't know if some of you got Jewish friends, and when they write the word God, they write G-D, because the name of God is so holy, you don't dare put it on a piece of paper that you might throw away. It's sacred. And Jesus says to her, I am. He's saying, Martha, I'm not just a teacher, I'm not just a counselor, I'm not just a religious leader. I am God Himself. I was, I am, and I will be. I'm the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I am the one who created the universe. I am the one who spoke everything into existence. And this is the same man who gave us life, who created love and family and joy. This is the same God who thought up things like oceans and mountains and sunset. This is the same God who brought all good things that we experience in life standing right before her. And He's saying, Martha, you are not waiting for a prophecy. You are not waiting for a person who is right here before you. It kind of makes me think of this. Has anyone ever heard of a show, An Undercover Boss? Hey? Remember that show? It's a show where the boss is kind of dresses up like one of his employees, and he goes and he lives that out. And he sort of like stays with them for about a week or so, and they don't realize that he is the big boss. And he comes and he does the normal work that the lowest guy in his business will do it. And I remember when I was watching it, I'm sitting there and I was saying to myself, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. And then something would happen when the boss will reveal himself to this guy, and I would cry. Because it was just amazing when the boss revealed himself. And Jesus is kind of an undercover boss, isn't it? And He says, I showed up, I'm here. You thought I was just a teacher, you thought I was just a rabbi. You had no idea, and I'm right here. God Himself, Emmanuel. Then He asks Martha this amazing question. He says, do you believe this? Do you trust me? Before He does anything, before He steps in, do you believe this? You know, part of how we answer the question, does God care, is based on how we answer the question, who do you think Jesus is? If He's just a teacher or a spiritual leader, if He's just a voice for compassion or justice or love, and at the end of the day He offers no real hope, it doesn't matter if He arrives on time or 2 days later or 2 days earlier. Sin is still sin. Death is still death. The grave is still the grave. But what if He is more? What if He is more than that? What if He was 2 days later because sickness is not an obstacle to Him? What if He is 2 days later because death is not an obstacle to Him? Lazarus is dead. And for your sake I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. In other words, that you might know He is more than what you think He is. In your life right now, whatever you're facing, He is more than you think He is. But the question is, do you believe that? Do you trust Him? And that's the question Martha is now wrestling when wondering about, can I trust Him? Can I trust Him? And in a way, the story could end right there. And Jesus has told us who He is. He has given us a picture of who He really is. And we should believe the story could have finished right there, but it didn't. And Jesus is talking to Martha, and He noticed someone was missing. Mary was missing. She was inside the house still grieving, and Mary knew Jesus was there. And yet she did not come out to see Him. She felt her disappointment so deeply, she could not even face Jesus eye to eye. It's like those moments in life when you feel like it has gotten so bad, I can't even pray. I can't even go to church, so I'd rather stay at home, and sort of wallow in my own sorrow. I don't even want to be around a person or talk to a person, or never mind even hear anything about a religious thing. It can just break your heart, doesn't it? You see, another conversation is now needed. So Jesus sends Martha to get Mary. And Mary says, the teacher is here, she said, and he's asking for you. He is asking for you. Have you ever had someone come looking for you when you are down and discouraged? Maybe it's a phone call, a text, just to check in, see how you're doing. And in a way, that's why I encourage you to try and come and join us today at 3 o'clock, because I know it's going to lift up someone. I know it's going to encourage someone. No matter how deep this pain goes, God's grace can always go deeper. And Mary comes out to meet him, and she falls in his feet and she's weeping. Lord, if you have been here, my brother would not have died. It looks like the same thing that Martha said, isn't it? Except there is one difference. You see, in the original language, the word my brother is more apathetical than the first one. My brother would not have died. In other words, my brother. Where Martha was basically just calling him a brother. Mary is saying, my brother. In other words, my very flesh, my very soul. This is not just any loss, this is my loss. This is not just any pain, this is my pain, Mary says. This is the person who matters most to me, Jesus. These words cut right to the core. And the text says that when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in the spirit and troubled. The same man who said, I am the resurrection and the life, and you just need to believe in me, is now deeply moved and deeply troubled. Where have you laid him, he asked. Then there are no words exchanged between them. This is a different kind of conversation. He had to meet Martha with theology. He's going to have to meet Mary with his heart. Jesus goes to see the tomb, the place where his best friend is buried, and in the grave. Then he does something so surprising. He goes to the tomb and he falls to the ground and he begins to cry. He begins to cry. The text says, and I believe John was so touched by the fact that Jesus cried, that I am was now crying and weeping like a baby, that the only words that he could write down in the text was, Jesus wept. Jesus wept. In the first century, weeping is not that kind of a quiet, private, sort of like a bit of Kleenex and sort of blowing your nose kind of crying. Weeping in the Old Testament, weeping in that time means literally shouting and screaming and really being expressive about it. In fact, he wailed so loudly that everyone around begins to take notice. He screams so loud in pain that people say, isn't this someone who could have healed him? How in the world would he be so grieved? Why did he break down? Why did Jesus break down? Because he cared. Because he cared. Jesus did not weep because he lacked power. He wept because he was full of so much love that he was disappointed at what the world has become. That which he called to being was no longer the world that he knew. When it comes to describing Jesus weeping, the Greek word is often used for the snorting of horses. Jesus is visibly angry. He's breathing out loudly. His nostrils flare in and out like a wild animal ready to attack. He is angry at sickness itself. He is angry at death itself. He is angry at the grave itself. He is angry at the suffering itself. He is angry and he sees it face to face and he's confronting it. Does God care about what's going on in your life? Well, he died for it, didn't he? And so Jesus said, roll out the stone. Lazarus has been buried 3 to 4 days, they said to him. Now 4 days may not sound like a big deal to you, but 4 days was a significant number in that day. According to rabbinical teaching of the day, when a person died, their soul remains in the body for 3 days. Then on the 4th day, the soul will begin to leave that body. 4 days in the tomb meant his soul had already left. 4 days in the tomb means his flesh was beginning to decay. 4 days in the tomb means, Jesus, you're too late. Maybe if you'd arrived a day earlier, 2 days earlier, it would have been all right. And here's the last conversation, and we'll close with this. This conversation was a one-sided conversation. And Jesus calls out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And I bet the Jews would drop. People were in shock. Lazarus comes out, and Lazarus did. The text says that dead men can come out alive, and it was happening in front of them. Lazarus literally came out. You see, just when you think God can't, God can. Just when you think God is 2 days late, He is right on time. But for those 2 days, they wondered where God was. For those 2 days, they lived with this crushing doubt and despair. For those 2 days, they were not sure if God cared until they could see what God was really able to do. By the way, this was not the main event of the day. I mean, think about it. Lazarus walked out of the tomb. Think of stories he had to share with his friends and family and children later on in years. You know, Lazarus is the only other person that would say to death, oh, not again. Come out. Jesus saying, come out. The Apostle Paul would later describe it in this way, for now we see only a reflection as in a mirror, then we shall see him face to face. You see, God didn't just kickstart the world and leave us to do the rest. He came into it. He suffered with us. He went to the cross and he went into a grave. And then on the 3rd day, the dead man came out saying, I'm here. I'm here. So does God care? Yes, He does. Let us pray.